number 119, Trust and the Process of Transformation. I am Kathleen Wiley, a Jungian psychoanalyst in North Carolina, and I am here with Deborah Henson-Conant, a composer, artist, creative. We both play the harp, and that's why we call this Jung at Harp. And today we're going to be continuing an exploration we started a couple of weeks ago about trust. And what is trust? How do we trust? And what difference does that make in the process of transformation? And I think it makes a lot of difference. But I'm going to defer to you, DHC, and see what you think about that.
Sure. Well, I would just like to say that one of the reasons this is so up for me in my life has to do with this musical, The Golden Cage. And it keeps unfolding to me. And I just want to say that in a sense, this musical is like a dream that I had many years ago, and it has unfolded over my life. And so I keep analyzing it and kind of discovering parts of it, because as a sort of an allegory, it's opening up possibilities and sort of fundamental concepts in my own life. Mm-hmm. And where trust fits is the show has kind of two parts. In the beginning, the two characters are meeting. They realize they fight. They find out, who they are to each other in a sense. In the middle of the show, there is a moment when all that happens, everything goes away. It's like a time out of time. And all that happens is there a moment of trust. And it's this is all very intuitive. The way I create it is intuitive. So that's why I'm interested in going back to analyze it. What's interesting is the whole harmonic vocabulary changes. In the beginning, it sounds almost like Gregorian chant, almost like a prayer. Mm-hmm. And then it shifts. So it almost goes back in time to a kind of music that is very ancient. And then it shifts to another kind of music that's not quite as ancient, when they're both singing without any accompaniment and just the two of them. And all they're saying is, all my life I've waited for this moment, to believe, to have trust. This is it. This is all I've waited for. Again, this was totally intuitive. And what happens after that is, sometimes makes no sense at all. One of the characters does an evil thing. The other one is being impossible. All this stuff happens. And yet everything that happens after that point leads to their actual transformation. And and it's almost like it is the fastest and only way that these characters could have gotten to transformation and connection, even though it goes through, death and messiness and everything. It happens, it gallops through that. And it's inevitable. After the point of trust, it is inevitable that transformation will happen. That's what as I go back and look at the show, I realize that it's almost like it doesn't, we think, well, it takes time to develop a blah, 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 blah. And I do believe that. But what happens in this show is there is a split second of trust in which there is a state change. There's a state change in the characters. After that, I have it that it is both inevitable and unimportant. It is going to happen. There is going to be transformation. And so now I'm looking at that in my own life. I'm looking at, where do I not trust? Where could I be trusting? What would that feel like? Mm-hmm. I think I grew up in a situation in which there just wasn't, I did not develop that muscle. We moved every year. My parents divorced. I went off to live with my grandparents. There was just no real, and when I looked up what are the elements of trust in Wikipedia, it was like consistency, reliability. And I was like, wait a minute, I had none of those things. So I was really interested when we started talking about this, that you started talking about the discomfort, what it takes to develop trust in your own life. And I have it that transformation will not happen, at least for me, until there is trust in myself and in my life. And what's that going to look like? So you are the Jungian psychoanalyst. I am just the artist. Here, Kathleen, take this.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what's coming up for me as you're saying all of what you're saying. I go back to Erik Erikson, who was a Freudian psychoanalyst, who developed a model called the psychosocial stages of development. And he says that the first psychosocial developmental task from birth to 2 years old is the development of trust versus mistrust. And that it is built and it goes to either side of the pole based on our experiences with the environment. And as an infant child, our experience with the environment means our experience with our caregivers. So those things you discovered in Wikipedia, constancy and reliability and familiarity, are all part of what help the infant child feel safe as they move from the constancy and the familiarity of the womb literally into the outer world environment that's different. So for me, part of trust then has something to do with the ability to be in the present moment and to be in the present moment with an experience that your primary needs are being met. You know, that and by primary needs, if we think about the infant child, what does the newborn need? They need to be held, they need to be fed, they need their diaper to be changed, they need to be tended when they need to be tended on their schedule, not the schedule that the caregivers would prefer sometimes.
And I have it that they need to be sung to.
Oh, yes, because singing, the one thing that and research shows that the infant upon birth immediately knows the mother's voice because it's heard it the entire time it's in utero. So there's something about the mother's voice and, of course, singing the mother's voice. Anyway, so I think trust has something to do with being and just surrendering to the present moment. And the moment, as I recall it, that you're referencing in The Golden Cage is where Althea and Boris, the characters, both surrender to being in the present moment, being with what they're feeling in this moment in time with one another in the place that they are. Althea moves beyond hanging on to her familiar rote litany of of problems and laments, and Boris gives up his hyper focus on this one thing that has to look a certain way, and they're completely in the moment. They surrender to the moment, and I think that is what trust being in the moment somehow have to go hand in hand. And how do we get there is a little bit trickier because it's not an ego driven thing. In fact, the ego often defends against it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Whenever I've described this part of the show, and which is an analogy for a part of an experience in life. When I've described it, it's like a time out of time. You're right. The characters give up all their ego, everything they think defines who they are. They give it up. It's all given up. And even me as the playwright and composer, I give up everything. I give up all my harmonic vocabulary. I give up all the accompaniment. I give up everything that is like la 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 la. Stops. It just stops. And it hangs. The show hangs in the middle, almost like a string or like an umbrella that it's almost sheltering everything. It's a funny feeling of buoyancy. And as you were speaking, I was thinking, well, at what time in my life every day do I have that feeling that I have given up everything? And it is in two times. One, when I'm meditating, which I can sometimes get to when I'm running, sometimes get to when I'm sitting. And I think for me, when I'm singing and playing, singing and accompanying myself, and writing on the harmonies and being able to improvise, which is why I love teaching that to people as well, because it allows that feeling. So what I'm hearing you say, as I'm asking you, okay, where can I find trust in myself? And so it sounds like those two places may be places for me to find trust in myself. How can other people find trust in themselves and and I have it that there's probably many ways, but we only need to find one that we can just explore. And then I really want to hear about this other part of it that you talked about, the discomfort.
Right. You know, in terms of how do you find it, I'm going to um, cite something that Angeles Arian, who was a cultural anthropologist who studied indigenous cultures around the world to glean universal spiritual truths, said. And she said that there are four universal healing salves. And I think that where we have mistrust, there's healing that needs to happen. Healing in the sense of we need to become more whole so we can be in the present moment. And she says the four healing salves are singing, dancing, storytelling, and solitude. And if you think about singing or dancing, or when we're telling our stories, or solitude in the sense of what we feel in meditation, a true active presence with oneself, which is my working definition of solitude. All four of those activities put you in the present moment of being.
Right, right.
And so they are vehicles to be in the present moment and trust, to feel the constancy of one's own body, mind, the constancy of whatever environment one is in. You know, singing, dancing, storytelling, and solitude, all four of those originate from within one's own being. You know, they originate from within that part of self that holds. And I think that those four tools are the place to start. You know, this is why journaling can be such an effective tool, because if you journal every day or do stream of consciousness writing, then, or what you call, you call it something different.
Sprint writing or something.
Sprint writing. Yeah. Then you're telling your story. You know, you're talking about what's going on internally. And dancing, you know, when you move freely, you're moving with what your body experiences in response to music typically. And with singing, again, one is giving expression in a way that moves outside of the head being so in control. You know, when we talk, the head is more in charge. When we sing, the body gets much more involved. And with solitude, we really feel the experience of oneness with self, which is really what is the trust that we need. You know, but the infant child, that muscle of trust and oneness with oneself has to be activated in response to, in relationship to the outside world.
Yes, so as you're speaking, I'm just writing things down. I wish I had a big blank piece of paper I could write every bit of this. So you said the word giving expression. These give expression to the human experience.
Yes.
You know, unless we make it, well, it doesn't matter. I mean, I think many of us now that there's like, you know, American Idol and this, and, you know, you have to do it well and you have to look good. And I know these have always been out there, but that can create a great deal of anxiety and self-consciousness that undermines these very, very human to giving expression. And instead it ends up giving expression to something that undermines us and actually removes our trust in some ways. But I was struck by the fact that both you and I, in our communities that we run, are working towards helping, opening up self-expression through the physical connection, and for me, through stories, exactly these things: singing with your, you know, with your voice or with your hands, you know, singing and storytelling. And physicalizing. Right now we're working on a piece called Baroque Flamenco, which is really all about just imagining that you can do stuff and bringing that in. And I do find that when I can sing what I'm saying, when I can feel the harmony change, something happens and I'm present in a way I'm not normally present. as though every part of me is resonating together. So it just, I mean,
Mhm.
since and I'm thinking also of all those things that I did not have as a child, all the consistency or reliability. But
Right.
what I did have is I had music. I heard singing, not just my mother, but my father from inside that womb. I
Yeah.
heard that in all the resonance. So to me, I think that is probably why I just go right there. Like that is the
Mhm.
one thing that I can trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I have it that others will have that one thing that they can trust.
Yeah.
And how will they find it? And then I keep wanting to come back. So let's just take me for an example. So there I have that thing I can trust. And then there's the whole world of stuff I don't trust. And therefore I will not let it transform. I will I,
Mm.
I will not allow transformation in my life in other ways. And so can we talk about discomfort and how to
Yeah, because this is really important. Sometimes when people start analysis, they feel worse before they feel better. And that's because if we're going to truly transform, we have to be willing and we have to be willing to tolerate the discomfort and pain that all of our ego defenses have tried to keep us from feeling. So,
how
yeah.
do I know? I'm going to ask, how do I know the difference between, that kind of pain and I'm doing something that's going to damage me?
Doing something meaning by being with a felt sense or a thought or a
Anything. How do I know the difference between a discomfort that is sent towards transformation and a discomfort that's actually dangerous? For example, in The Golden Cage,
right.
one of the characters, without meaning to, maybe, I don't know, maybe he means, maybe he doesn't mean, shoves another one off a cliff. Okay, that's evil, and yet it is the only way for the truth to actually happen. The other character hits thing, is seeing her death in front of her. It's horrible. She's made a big mistake. Everything's wrong. And yet that is the thing that causes transformation. And both of them in after that moment have a moment when they're saying, I screwed up. Everything is now gone. It's gone. It's gone.
Well, from my perspective, I don't see Boris pushing Alfia off the cliff as evil because she says, push me. But then we could get into another whole discussion about what is evil. So we won't go there. But I want to go on record on behalf of Boris to say
Okay.
that Alfia says, push me, push me. I think that to come back to your question, how do we know? Sometimes we don't until the results. Sometimes we don't know until we take the action and we see what happens next. Sometimes we do know because we have a niggling feeling, intuition, awareness inside of us. I mean, we're talking about a fine level of discernment, but I talk to people who have anxiety about the same thing. We get the idea that all anxiety or fear is bad, whereas, fear is an instinctive response. If we're in the jungle wild and we see a lion ahead, or we're on a hiking trail now and we see a mother bear,
Or
we
a
want
or a spider
uh,
or any small thing.
then we want to have some fear that will cause us to blow our whistle to get the bear out of the way, to cause we want to pay attention to the anxiety that's coming up. But with consciousness, and I believe consciousness involves our ability to relate to and track where our different body sensations and impulses come from, and is this a historical pattern, or is this truly something that doesn't have that overlay? So we're talking about having to learn how to discern that, and each individual has to do that by looking at and working with their own feedback loops, what Jung called complexes, their own historical overlays, um, and teasing apart what's what. But I want to say about the discomfort, there also comes a point where, and I think about major transformations in my life, where I might have had some anxiety or fear about taking the step because I had no idea what was going to happen. But I knew if I didn't take that step, something in me was going to die. Something of my soul, something of my deeper self was going to die. So I thought, what do I have to lose? If I take this step and die, energetically, it doesn't matter because I know if I stay, I'm going to die. And that's not a head kind of experience. That's a deep, deep gut knowing. My guess is for you, when you began a few years ago to bring the golden cage back around and look at how to actually get it onto the stage, something in you at that point knew if you didn't do that, something in you was going to die. And you might not have thought about it that way, but my bet is there was something you knew you had to do it. This thing had to be out in the world.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
and I I'd known that for years, and there were things that happened along the way that made a difference. Like
Mm-hmm.
for me,
Right.
the first, I think one of the first, I don't even, they all had to do with other people. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, one had to do with connecting with Tim, who's the was the music director for a lot of the workshops and also the orchestrator, and just our consistency of meeting every week.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was just sort of a consistency model. But then there was a man named Larry who I met. He came up to me at a show and he said, or at a festival, and he said, gee, you must be really happy with your life, you know, because everything you've done with the harp. And I was like, well, actually, no, I'm not happy because of the golden cage. And he said, well, would you be happy if it was in on Broadway, you know, getting awards? And I said, look, I would be happy if I was working on it like I said I would, if I was living up to my commitment. And he said, okay, well, I'm going to hold you to that, to working 30 minutes a day on it. And so he literally held me to that. He became my accountability partner and a very powerful accountability partner. And that is how I then made the next, you know, finished the next version of it. And then I like didn't know what to do again, you know. So all along the way,
Mm-hmm.
there were these other people who came in and actually created. He was the one, because he pushed me, that went into the show. It hadn't been in the show before. So yes, I did notice that I'm, you know, I was not going to die with this show in me, with this story in me. But it took these other people for me to be able to do it.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And again, I think how do we trust the process of transformation?
Mhm.
Often we can only trust it when someone else is holding us in the process.
Right.
And if we go back again to Erickson's psychosocial model, it is a psychosocial model, meaning it's something that happens internally in relationship to another living person. You know, I always say to my analysis, relationships that have wounds that happen in relationship have to be healed in relationship. There's a lot of work that we can all do on our own through our spiritual practices, through psychological self-help, through mentoring, through coaching, through skill development. But when it comes to the primary, the deepest, deepest wounds, that are relational wounds, they can only be healed in relationship. And that happens in the analytic relation, the good enough analytic relationship or therapeutic relationship. It happens in between 12-step programs with sponsors. It can happen between mentors and mentees, between coaches and those they're coaching, between teachers and students. It happened for you with Larry, who became your
Hmm. Hmm.
accountability buddy. And
Right.
it happened with Tim, who it sounds like became kind of a creative partner.
Right. And
Yeah,
then thirdly, it happened with another friend, Rachel, who came in and said, look, I'm giving you some money.
yeah,
Take this show, put it in the world, you know,
yeah,
stop messing around,
yeah,
get out there and do it.
yeah.
But I have this big question here, which is, so for some reason, each of those relationships really worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
They each of them took me, and each of them was doing something completely different in a different way. Now I'm looking back at times when I've worked with coaches, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll tell me to. I believe what they're telling me. I
Right.
believe it, but I either can't do it, or I won't do it, or I just fuss around, or I don't. And now, one of the things that I noticed about each one of these that I just realized as I was saying is that the function was very simple. Tim came to my house. We had a commitment for 2.5 hours. He came to my house. Whatever I'd finished, he played. If I'd only finished 1 minute, we played it for 2.5 hours. Or we went on and invested something else. With Larry, it was one text. It was at the end of every day. That was it. And there was very little other communication. And with Rachel, it was this one thing. Here's the check. Do it. And so then, and I think once that check was there, I was like, oh, I see this process. And that first check was just get to the first workshop. Let's get there so we have a show. And then there was all the other fundraising. So, but I spent, thousands of dollars with coaches that it just, why? What is it? What's the function?
Well,
help.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's going on psychologically is these three people each somehow mobilized mobilized a part of your deep self, yourself in the sense of the totality of who you are. They mobilized it and they carried that part of you in the outside world for you. Larry carried it in the part of you that knew you could do 30 minutes a day. So his checking in became like a transitional object that connected you to that capacity in yourself. Rachel showed up and said, here's the needed resource, the money. So she connected you with that part of you that knew you had the energy to move this forward. Tim carried for you that consistent creative space to let it emerge. So
I would like to say there was a fourth person there too.
Okay.
And that was my friend Paul. I mean, there was my family, my aunt, people
Yeah.
who loved it, but there was my friend Paul who had seen the very original version of this show years and years ago, and who consistently, though, just over the years would say, let's get this show out there.
Yeah.
You got to get this show out there.
Yeah.
It has to happen.
Yeah.
So there were all these little.
But the difference, we can pay a coach, we can pay a mentor, or someone can pay a psychoanalyst. But unless there's some unconscious match, there's some, and unconscious means we can't control it. We can't make it happen. Unless there's some meeting of those energies that they are connected to in the outer world and giving voice to, and that is within us that we can't access on our own, the power isn't there. It becomes a head trip.
Right.
And so that is unfortunately sometimes a lot of what happens when we spend money on all kinds of programs or coaches or mentors of this or that. So we're back to trusting the process.
Right.
But there was something about these four people also that you innately in your body, something in your larger self, trusted them. You trusted when Larry texted every day he wasn't being a pain in the butt and harassing you. You trusted he really was in this with you. You trusted that Tim wanted to be in the process. So we're back to that being able to just be with the moment and ourself and the person we're with. That is part of the key for transformation.
Wow. Okay. So and I can see how consistency was a huge part of two of these. I mean, so my friend Paul, the consistency wasn't obvious. It was like every couple years or whatever.
Yeah.
There was that. With Tim, it was like, this is on the calendar. We're doing this. It doesn't matter what happens. We're meeting. I don't care.
Right.
It could be a wash. We're going to be together. And with Larry, it was that consistency of the each second. And then with Rachel, it was different. It was like, I could see an end result. You gave me this. I want to give you this. I want to sit in that room with you, and I want you to see this moment. We're doing this together. I had a real feeling we are doing this together.
Right.
So, and there was, of course, discomfort in every one of these. and now and I don't know how to look for these things in my in the rest of my life. There are so many places I'm longing for transformation, and somehow
Yeah, I think that's part of the gift of what in religious world they talk about as the gift of grace.
mm,
I think I think that there's a mystery to some of these processes that we can't make it happen. But what we can do is we can invite it.
mhm,
We can be open
mm,
to it. We can pay attention to where we do feel those moments. That's when we're engaging with someone where we feel a spark.
mhm,
um, and when we feel that spark, then we can know that person may be a link for us, and we may
mhm,
be a link for them to something.
mhm.
So I think we can do that, but I truly think what we're talking about is an unconscious phenomena. um, I'm very big on we can ask psyche if we're stuck. We can say to the larger self, we can, say, show me the way forward, give me a dream that helps me know where to look or what to do next. And sometimes, people show up, they just show up in our pathway. I mean, just like Larry, he showed up after the
Right.
show, so I think we have to also, and I'm thinking about how Boris just shows up at Althea's cage.
Right.
If we can be open to what comes across our path unbidden, that is sometimes the link. But if we think we have to figure it all out, then we close the door and we don't, it's kind of like the old saying of the guy there was a flood coming and went up he said to God, okay, save me from the flood. And so God sent him a car as the waters rise. And he said, oh no, God's going to save me. And then the waters came on up and God sent a boat. And he said, oh no, God's going to save me. And they sent the boat back. And then he's finally up on the roof and God sends a helicopter, and the helicopter, he says, no, God's going to save me. And then he dies and gets to heaven and says, why didn't you save me? He said, well, I sent 3 tries. I mean, it's kind of like that. Life sometimes sends us what it is we need, but because it doesn't look like we think it should look, and like all our goal directedness and coaching says it should look, we just say, oh, no, no, I'm waiting. That's not it. That's not it. So,
It's really funny that you say that, because now I'm realizing, and I've told Larry this, when the first time I saw him, he scared me. And I was like, no, no. I was like, do not talk to that person. Do not do that. Um, and the first time I saw Tim, it was just in a circumstance where I was like, oh, okay. I mean, it's not like I saw each of them and I was like, hey, wait a second. And then I discovered, oh, Tim lives down the street from me. How convenient is that? And then, but how convenient was that? Oh my God, he's the person who ended up creating the orchestration. I mean, when you hear the Golden Cage, he's the person who created this amazing magic that brings the film alive.
right.
And I can remember the first time I met him, and it was really just kind of like, I don't know, maybe we'll like each other, and then it turns into this really profound
There you
relationship.
go.
So what I'm hearing, and I know we have to end in about 1 minute, I'm hearing that we cannot control this, but
Right.
we can ask.
Right.
And we can ask, just like you said, I'll go back and listen to this to say exactly what you asked, which was something like, speaking to your psyche, I am willing.
Yeah.
And now that I'm saying this, I'm sorry, now I'm realizing that is exactly what happens in the Golden Cage. All my life, I've waited for this moment to believe. And all they're saying is, I trust, I believe. That is it. They just say that.
Right.
They just sing that.
Right.
And then everything transpires from that moment. So now, and I keep realizing, duh, it's all there. Just go look at it. And so that's what I'm going to do. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back and I'm going to listen to that part of the show. I'm going to put it on a loop, and I'm going to listen to it over and over again.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way. We forget to ask. We forget to ask our own inner guidance what it is that's needed, and to say to the universe or whatever your own belief system is, send me what I need.
Mhm.
Send me.
Mhm.
I'm willing, and I
Mhm.
think that the willingness is a part of what happens when we can be in the moment and surrender, which is trust. What trust means, we surrender.
Mm.
And then with that, the willingness, you're right, something changes. It
Right.
sets in motion a whole new trajectory. And I want to end with a quote from Goethe, which is my favorite quote. I have it calligraphied and it's hung on my wall now for probably 25 years. And he writes, until one is committed, there's hesitancy, the chance to draw back, ineffectiveness regarding all acts of initiative and creation. Once one is committed, then providence moves to whatever you dream to do. Begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. And I think that commitment is something that isn't an intellectual shift, but it's something that's a heart and gut shift.
Mm.
And that moment in the play that you're referencing between Althea and Boris saying, I've waited all this time for this moment, is they commit then.
Right.
There's a commitment that happens because they're fully present and willing. And that's really the key to trusting the process of transformation, in my opinion.
Well, Kathleen, I'm so moved, and I'm just going to go back and I'm going to listen to that part.
Yeah.
I'm going to. I love that quote from Goethe, and I'm going to go listen to that trust, the moment, and what it sounds like for me, in my own dream. And I encourage everybody else. You can certainly hear the way my heart sang that in the show. You could go to goldencagemusical.com, and that tells you how to watch the show. And I have a feeling that everyone's heart has sung that in their own way somehow. And so that's what I'm going to do this week, is go there and see what I discover about trust in the process of transformation. Kathleen, thank you again for these conversations. And thank you, Raquel, and everybody else who's been here today and who watches these afterwards. Thank you for being part of this conversation and this transformation that is going on. And we'll see you all again next week. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.